good to be here this evening. I hope that what I have to say will be of some assistance to us in our daily walk. I'm going to talk about the Scribes and the Pharisees tonight. Be not as the Scribes and the Pharisees. Christ gave a pretty scathing rendition and berating to the Scribes and Pharisees. But he addressed the people and the disciples, and he told them, we're going to read of it, he told them, do what they tell you to do, but don't do as they do. Don't be as they are. And then he proceeded to tell them how bad they really were. And we're going to study that a little bit this evening. Now, to begin a study on someone, you kind of got to know who you're talking about and what you're talking about. And I'm going to, you take this for what it's worth. I got this, I made a request or asked what a Pharisee was, and this is what it brought me. And I've looked over 3 or 4 places, and this is the best one that I could come up with that I would try to produce what a Pharisee is. The Pharisees in the Bible were members of a religious group, a party that frequently clashed with Jesus. We see that throughout the Scriptures. When it said the Pharisees came to Jesus, or they saw this. It's kind of like they followed him around just to antagonize him and maybe bring some darkness to his teachings so that the people wouldn't follow him. But they frequently clashed over the interpretation of the law. They would say, now this is what the law says, now what do you say? See, that's how they would do it, in front of the people. They wouldn't come to him and just ask him. They'd wait till there was a group of people around, and he was around with them, and then they'd come and antagonize him and see what he'd do. Well, that's the way they were. Now, the name Pharisee means separated one. They separated themselves from the rest of the people. And the Pharisees separated themselves from society to study and to teach the law. Now, that might have started out to be a good thing. They wanted to learn the law, and they wanted to teach it. So, that doesn't sound so bad, does it? We want to learn the law, and we want to teach it, don't we? Well, what happened to them? What made them turn into such dark people, you might want to say? They separated themselves not only from the people, but they considered the people unclean. The rest of the people. If you weren't a Pharisee and you didn't study what they wanted you to do, you were unclean to them. They didn't want to have anything to do with you. But yet they wanted to teach you. They wanted to tell you what you needed to do. See? How many people do we know that do that? You need to be doing this. Well, why aren't you doing it? The Pharisees just considered these people unclean. Now, you can take this for what it's worth, but this is what this rendition brought me. It said the middle class, they were middle class businessmen, trade workers of all sorts. They started and they controlled the synagogues. And those Jewish meeting places that served for both local worship and education. They wanted to rule over the worship and the education. Teach the people. And they put a great importance on oral tradition, making it equal with the laws. They brought in their own traditions, and they wanted to make them equal with the law, like washing your hands and such and one thing and another. And they wanted to make that equal to the laws written in the Old Testament. You know, the rulers would say, okay, we're going to get back with God. I want you scribes over here, I want you to write down the words. I want you to write down the oral, the commandments that God has given us. I want you to write them down so we can read them. That's where the scribes come in. So they work together, and they all kind of belong to one another, the scribes and the Pharisees. They work together. Some of their beliefs was life after death, resurrection of the body, this body, not a spiritual body, but this body. And the importance of keeping rituals that they considered traditions. You know, they continually brought these things up to Jesus. And we're going to study some of that. We're going to look at some of that. As I said, in a scathing rebuke of these people, the Pharisees, found in Matthew, the 23rd chapter, that's where we're going to go next. He found them out, and he told them that he exposed their sins to the people. Because the people were around, and they heard exactly what he said. The Pharisees could not bear the truth of Jesus' teachings, and they sought to destroy his influence among the people all through the scriptures. You see that every time it's mentioned. And the Pharisees came to Jesus and said, they tried to get to him. And the scribes, in the New Testament times, the scribes belonged to the sect of the Pharisees, and they supplemented the ancient written law by their traditions, and thereby obscured the commandments. They wanted to make their commandments God's commandments. And that was their goal. And they were public teachers. And they taught the people. That's what the scribes did. They wrote it down and they taught it, just as the Pharisees did. These are the people we're talking about. Those that wanted to teach the people, but they wanted to teach their traditions and their commandments as to what they said the law said. How many people do we know that do that today? You know, they'll come up with some doctrine and they'll preach it and they'll want you to believe it. They'll say if you don't believe it, you're going to hell. That's just the same thing these people were trying to do. And they were trying to discredit Christ. But there were some of the scribes that were spiritual men that like Gamaliel, he told the Sanhedrin when they came before them because they were preaching Jesus, he told the Sanhedrin, leave them alone. Just leave them alone. If the things that they're teaching come to light and stick around, then we might ought to think about it too. We might ought to think about what they're teaching. Just leave them alone. You know, if it's for naught, it'll go away. But if it's not, we might ought to think about it. You know. So there were some of them who kind of saw the light, but still they didn't want to give up what they had. But Jesus said in Matthew, the 23rd chapter, starting in the first verse, then Jesus spake to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you to observe, that observe and do. But do not after their works. Don't be as they are. For they say, and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do for to be seen of men. For they make broad their phylacteries, and enlarge the borders of their garments, and love the uppermost rooms and feasts, and the chief seats in the synagogues, and greetings in the marketplace, and to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. They just loved this. This was their goal. Because they were above everyone else. In their eyes, that's what they were. But then Jesus says in the 8th verse, he says, be ye not called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all ye are brethren. Call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ. But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. See, that's just opposite of what they said, wasn't it? We're greater than you. You are servants. You do what we tell you to do because we know the law. We made it. And whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that shall humble himself shall be exalted. And then he goes in to talk to the scribes and the Pharisees themselves. And this, we're going to not read it all, but we're going to read some of it. We get the gist of what he wants to say. He says, but woe unto ye scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. See? For ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. If you want to go in and get into the kingdom, they try to keep you out of it. That's what they were doing. They were preaching against Christ, trying to keep the people out of Christ's kingdom. That's what they were doing. It says, woe unto ye, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. Woe unto ye, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Ye compass the sea and the land to make one proselyte. And when he is made, ye make him twofold the child of hell than yourselves. So you make him worse than you are by what you're trying to teach him. See? He says, ye fools. Oh, wait a minute. In the 17th verse, he says, ye fools and blind, for whether, wait a minute, I'm going to go back up to the, see, hang on just a minute. The 16th verse, excuse me. Woe unto you blinds and guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. See, they just turned everything around. They made their works more than the sacrifice. See? Here's this gold. It's worth a lot. Look at me. I'm giving all this gold. I'm putting it on the altar. See what it's worth? See how much I'm giving? I'm doing this for God. Well, what's greater? The gold or the one that sanctifies the gold? We should give the gold and say, here, this is yours. See, God sanctified the sacrifice because it was supposed to be a sacrifice. When he said to give of our means, that's what we do. In some small way, it's a sacrifice because we're giving it. It's his anyway. The gold's his anyway. People didn't realize that. The gold is his. But yet, they were making it more of them than anything else. And this is what he was fighting all through the scriptures. And this is the type of people that were trying to get rid of him. In the 24th verse of the same chapter here, he says, ye blind guides, which strain as a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but within are full of extortion and excess. He said, I can see you on the inside. He said, I see your heart. It's full of sedition. It's full of envy. It's full of pride. It's full of everything that's bad. You know, and he could see the inside. He sees our heart. He sees what's in our heart. He sees the inward man. He doesn't look on the outward man. He sees the inward man. And this is what he saw of them. He says in the 26th verse, he says, thou blind Pharisees, clean first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. Clean up your act. Clean up your mind. Clean up your inner man, and then your outward man will be clean. This is the type of people he was looking for. Looking at. In Matthew, the 15th chapter, we'll go read some of this. Matthew, the 15th chapter. Starting in the first verse, it says, Then came Jesus to the Scribes and Pharisees, which were at Jerusalem, saying, Then came to Jesus, the Scribes and Pharisees, which were in Jerusalem, saying, Why do thy disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? See? There's those traditions. Why do they transgress the traditions of the elders? He said, for they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But he answered and said unto them, Why do ye also transgress the commandments of God by your traditions? turned it around, didn't he? He said, wait a minute. Your traditions are a transgression of God's commandments. See, that's what he fought all the time with these Pharisees. This is what they brought up to him all the time. And then he goes in and says, you know, for God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and he that curses father or mother, let him die the death. But you say, and then he went on and told them what they said, and you can read it and go on. And then in the 9th verse, or in the 7th verse, he says this, ye hypocrites. There's that word again. He calls them hypocrites because that's what they are. They say and they do not. He says, ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, this people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. See, that's what they were doing. And that's what we have to be careful not to do. To teach our traditions as commandments of God. We can't. That's why he wrote down the scriptures by inspiration. Everything comes from him. And what he says is what it's supposed to be. We don't need to twist the scriptures in any way, form, or fashion. We have to be careful and study them and rightly divide the word of truth. That's our duty. And these people weren't doing that. They were teaching their own doctrine for their own commandments for doctrine. In Matthew, the 5th chapter, through the 7th chapter, we see the commandments of God. We see what Christ wants us to do. We see some of them. I'm just going to go over some of them just right quick. I'm not going to read the scriptures, but I'm just going to go over it. This is what he wants us to do. And this is what he wants out of us. Not to be angry with our brother without a cause. You know, it reads in there, you've heard it said of them of old time, you shall not kill. But I say, this is what he says. This is his commandment. Don't be angry with your brother without a cause. But then if we are angry with our brother, what are we to do about it? Agree with him speedily. Come to some agreement. Come to some point that you can come together as brothers and live together. That's what he wants. Because if we hate our brother, we just as well shoot him. Because that's what we've done. We've killed him. That's what he says. He says the thoughts of our heart can cause us to commit adultery. He says, you've heard it said to not commit adultery. But I say unto you, if you look upon a woman to lust after her, you've committed adultery with her already in your heart. See? We need to train our thoughts and our mind not to commit adultery. And we can do that with a lot of things. We can adulterate our life a lot of ways by putting our trust in things upon the earth instead of things in heaven. He says, yea or nay is a good answer. You don't need to swear by anything. Just say yes or no. That's all you got to say. That's good enough. Take wrong, long suffering at the hands of others. Take that wrong. Because the wrong that you have done to you now is nothing compared to what can be done in the end when you have either heaven or hell. Consider where you're going and suffer the things of this earth. Because the things that are a reward are greater than the sufferings here. Paul said, I'll gladly suffer the things here on earth for a home in heaven. That's what he wants us to do. That's what he's telling us in the Sermon on the Mount here. He says, love your enemies. Pray for them. How many of us want to pray for our enemy? He says to do that. Pray for your enemy. Be kind to them. Do your alms in secret, and your Father will reward you openly. Pray in secret, and your Father will reward you openly. You see the difference between what he says and what the Sadducees or the Pharisees and the Scribes are saying and doing? You see a difference? There's a big difference. Because the things Christ is saying are spiritual. They come from the inner man. All of this comes from the inner man. And he says to ask for our daily bread. Ask for it. God said, I'll give it to you. Just ask for it. He says, what father would give a son a serpent if he asked a fish? He said, if you ask, I will give it. But ask from the heart. And then he says, forgive us, or forgive us as we forgive. You ever considered that word as? You ever considered it? Do you want him to forgive us as we forgive a debtor? Yeah, I'll forgive you, but I'll never forget it. What did he say? Do you want God to forgive it, but never forget it? That's what God said he'll do. So why don't we do the same thing? See? That's applying the scriptures to your life. That's what he's saying. This is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to conduct your life. In the Spirit. So we need to consider that little word as. How are we forgiving our brother? How are we asking forgiveness? In the 5th chapter of Matthew, again, in the 20th verse, he says this, for I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. See? If your righteousness does not exceed theirs, then you have no entrance. He says in Matthew, the 7th chapter, the 15th verse, beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree that bringeth forth fruit, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but every corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. For a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that is not good for fruit is hewn down, cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them. And he's talking about these Pharisees and these scribes. You should know them by their fruits. Don't be as they are. Be better than they are. Be more righteous than they are. Because that's what I want. Because he says, not every one that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. But he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say unto me that in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name cast out devils? And in thy name done many wonderful works? Could the Pharisees say this? See? They did a lot. They might have done a lot of good. But they did a lot of harm too. And in that, and then will I profess to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. If you're not more righteous than the scribes and the Pharisees, ye have no entrance into the kingdom. That's what he told them. He said, I want you to be a lot more righteous than they are. And this is how I want you to live. And he went on through the 7th chapter here, giving us the instructions on how we need to conduct our life. He wants us to be kind, loving, considerate, and humble. In Galatians, the 6th chapter, starting in the first verse, this is the kind of attitude he wants us to have. He says, Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself. There's that consideration. Now, before I go to this brother that's overtaken in this fault, let me talk to myself first. Now, am I strong enough to go talk to him? Do I have the things I need to say to him? Do I need to take somebody with me? And let's do a little study, a little consideration on what we're going to do. Then go to the brother and do this. Restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest, what? Lest thou shalt also be tempted. You know, not necessarily tempted in what that person's doing, but tempted in thinking that we're greater than they are, that we're more righteous than they are. Oh, I'm more righteous, so I'm going to go talk to them. I'm going to give them the right act. No. Consider yourself, lest you be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. There's that humbleness. Bear ye one another's burdens. He says in the 3rd verse, for if a man think himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. See, that's where we consider. And he says in the 4th chapter, 4th verse, but let every man prove his own work, and then he shall have rejoicing in himself alone. Not outward, but inward. And not in another. We won't have to glory in that person. We won't have to say, look what we did. We restored this person. Now he's back in the fold. Glory to us. You know, we didn't do it. God did it. consider ourselves. Consider what we're doing. Be humble. Be kind. Be considerate. Loving. That's what he wants of us. The lesson is yours. We never know the minds of those that are here. One who wants to start this walk of life or one who needs the prayers of the church. We would bid you come while we stand and sing.